Right, so phase one of the Gaza ceasefire is almost over, as frantic negotiations continue to get an agreement that is never likely to come. Benjamin Netanyahu, as we know, cannot afford to agree to a ceasefire. It will be the end of him and his government if he does. But it is not so much Gaza that is the focus here, but instead the ramifications the end of the ceasefire could have. That could end up seeing the end of peace with Egypt that has lasted for 46 years, and as always, Israel are the ones instigating this. In what is being viewed as a blatant effort to collapse the Gaza ceasefire, Israel have now reneged on their decision to leave the Philadelphi Corridor, the buffer zone between Gaza and Egypt, which Israel are illegally occupying, not just because it is Gaza territory, but because it violates the peace accords between Egypt and Israel as well. With Egypt having parked tanks outside of Rafah and beefing up their defences already in light of Donald Trump's threat to ethnically cleanse the people of Gaza into Egypt and to Jordan, Israeli control of this corridor is even more unthinkable than ever before, and with threats towards Egypt having been issued as well, is this the next war front in waiting as Netanyahu's madness continues to spread? Right, so as the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire approaches its conclusion, the prospect of conflict erupting between Israel and Egypt grows increasingly likely. Israel's recent declaration that it will not withdraw from the Philadelphi Corridor, a narrow buffer zone as that is along the Egypt-Gaza border, they have not only violated the terms of the current ceasefire, but also flouted the Camp David Accords once again as well, the landmark 1979 peace agreement that has maintained stability between Israel and Egypt for over 4 decades now. And although Egypt have been flexible, let's put it, previously on this matter in order to reach a peace agreement, the collapse of the Gaza ceasefire seems certain to happen now with just a day to go, combined with the narrative of Donald Trump, makes this a much less palatable option going forwards. They need to take a more hardline approach. This is a brazen move by Israel, though, widely seen as an attempt to derail negotiations for the second phase of the ceasefire, which is supposed to begin tomorrow, March the 1st, but which is still being bitterly negotiated, and to what avail. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, facing internal political pressures from the likes of Bezalel Smotrich and his religious Zionism party, appears more than willing to risk escalating tensions with Egypt in order to avoid accepting any phase 2 deal that would almost certainly collapse his government and, as a result, dump him out of power. Anyway, let's start with this business of the Philadelphi Corridor, which is a 14-kilometre strip of land along the Egypt-Gaza border, and it's been an ongoing feature of the Gaza genocide, having been under illegal Israeli control for roughly a year or so now. Under the terms of the Camp David Accords, the area is designated as a demilitarized zone. Israel have no business being there whatsoever, therefore, let alone controlling it. However, Israel's military incursion into the corridor and now its refusal to withdraw represent a blatant violation of both the ceasefire agreement and those Camp David Accords. Netanyahu's deranged defense minister, Israel Katz, has been particularly vocal in defending this decision, stating that Israel cannot and will not leave the Philadelphia Corridor, citing security concerns related to Hamas's alleged use of smuggling tunnels in the area. A quote featured in the Cradle saying, "We also have information that Hamas is planning to attack soldiers and towns during the ceasefire," Katz claimed during a meeting. The Philadelphia axis will remain a buffer zone, just as is the case in Lebanon and Syria, the defense minister added, openly confirming that Israeli forces will not withdraw from the area. "I have seen with my own eyes a fair number of tunnels that penetrate Philadelphia, some of which were closed and others open." Yeah, who's going to trust your eyes though, eh? Katz's insane comments there, however, have been met with widespread condemnation, as you would hope and expect. Critics argue that Israel's presence in the corridor is not about security, but rather about maintaining control over Gaza and undermining the ceasefire negotiations. By refusing to withdraw, Israel is effectively sabotaging the first phase of the ceasefire and jeopardizing the prospects for a second phase, exactly as many of us have been warning about, and is completely par for the course for a nation that, for its government to survive, returning to the genocide is the only move available to them. Such is the depravity and unhinged nature of those in power in Israel. It is a deliberate attempt by Netanyahu to avoid making concessions that could see the fall of his far-right coalition government, and as such his administration has evidently chosen to escalate tensions with Egypt rather than pursue a path towards lasting peace in Gaza, a peace that for too many in power in Israel is totally unthinkable and utterly unacceptable. The current ceasefire, brokered by Egypt and Qatar, was intended to provide a temporary respite from the violence that has devastated Gaza and to create a framework for more substantive negotiations to make the ceasefire permanent. All a nice idea, and certainly a welcome break for the people of Gaza, to be sure, but not one achievable when Israel is such dishonest brokers. The first phase, which included a limited exchange of prisoners and the delivery of humanitarian aid, was seen as a tentative step towards de-escalation, and despite Israel breaching that ceasefire repeatedly, denying aid and committing further acts of atrocity in Gaza, it has held for the full duration of that first phase, all 42 days of it. However, Israel's actions now on the Philadelphi Corridor are a clear show that phase 2 is never going to be something Israel are going to agree to, and are deliberately undermining the efforts others have entered into in good faith on that. And as you might have imagined, they have provoked a strong response from Hamas, of all people. Well, Hamas officials have accused Israel of acting in bad faith. You will not be surprised to hear they are the other side of these negotiations after all, and accuse them of using the ceasefire as a cover to consolidate its military control over Gaza. In a statement, Hamas warned that Israel's refusal to withdraw from the Philadelphi Corridor threatens to reignite the conflict and plunge the region into further chaos. And the group has also called on Egypt and other mediators to hold Israel accountable for its violations and to ensure that the terms of the ceasefire are enforced. So again, Egypt placed under more pressure here. With Israel's actions pretty much showing its commitment to the peace process is about as honest as anything else they've done or said, in other words, non-existent, there's absolutely no realistic chance that I can see of a peaceful and successful negotiation that's going to keep this ceasefire going. Egyptian officials have, to the surprise still of some, expressed deep frustration with Israel's actions. Much piss has been boiled here, so to speak, viewing them as a violation of both the ceasefire agreement and the Camp David Accords, as they absolutely are. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has reportedly warned that Israel's presence on the Philadelphia Corridor is unacceptable and could lead to a dangerous escalation. Perhaps he should have thought about that earlier when he gave Israel an inch and they took a mile where it comes to the Philadelphia Corridor, but there we go. At least he's getting the message now. Egypt has also raised concerns about Israel's broader military posture in the region, including its airstrikes in Gaza and its restrictions on the movement of goods and people. The Kerem Shalom crossing, where much aid gets in, for example, being inexplicably closed the other day, though it has since reopened, it being reported today that 195 aid trucks, including 16 fuel trucks, have entered Al-Alja and the Kerem Shalom crossing since this morning in preparation for their entry into the Gaza Strip. In preparation to get into the Gaza Strip, but will they actually get into the Gaza Strip? That is the open-ended question there. The cracks beginning to show in the relationship between Egypt and Israel, though, despite Egypt's position as a ceasefire mediator, have been steadily worsening for several months, though things seem to have definitively picked up more recently. Egypt has grown increasingly critical of Israel's actions in Gaza and more recently in the West Bank as well, slamming these abuses as counterproductive to the goal of achieving that two-state solution that still gets talked about. But then Israel have never wanted the two-state solution. Many Israeli figures, not least the UK ambassador Zippy Hotovely, have openly said it's rubbish and we don't believe in it and it's never going to happen. So quite why Egypt should be surprised now by this, I really don't know. Israel are not committed to the two-state solution. It's paid lip service to it, and that is it, in order to remain occupiers of Palestine, functionally. At the same time, Israel has become ever more suspicious of Egypt's intentions themselves, putting on the victimhood act and squealing about tanks outside the Gaza border and the reinforcement of Egyptians' border there. But when you threaten to displace a load of people into their land, or as Donald Trump has done, and some in the Israeli government have absolutely loved the idea of, completely illegally as that would be, then you shouldn't be surprised at not getting a warm reception over that. But given Israel is so used to always getting its own way, this spoilt brat nation spitting its dummy is pretty par for the course. The rhetoric from Israeli officials has further inflamed tensions as well, with some portraying Egypt now as a security threat to Israel, because that's sure to calm matters down, isn't it? Israeli military chief, or outgoing Israeli military chief Herzi Halevi, has expressed deep concern about Egypt's military build-up in the Sinai, describing it as a potential challenge to Israel's security. Because Egypt is clearly not allowed to defend itself or have any notion of security for itself. That's a picture we should all recognise coming from Israel now, though. But it also means Israel and Egypt are more and more viewing each other as adversaries far more than peaceful neighbours. The situation has been further complicated by the involvement of the United States, as it always seems to be, which has traditionally played a mediating role in the region, at least on the face of it. It's always been on Israel's side, let's not forget. But Israeli ambassador to the US, Yechiel Leiter, has reportedly warned that Israel will deal with Egypt very soon if it does not take steps to address Israel's security concerns. An attack on a mediator nation would go a long way towards derailing the Gaza ceasefire after all. Plus, again, it would show Israel are prepared to make enemies of anyone if it means Netanyahu gets to keep his government together and keep himself in power. If Israel and Egypt do come to blows, if a breakdown in the Camp David Accords happens, it would not only destabilise the region but also undermine the broader framework of Arab-Israeli peace, because those peace accords have served as a model for other peace agreements, including the Abraham Accords between Israel and several other Arab states. If the Israel-Egypt peace agreement were to collapse, therefore, theoretically, that could have a domino effect, the master plan, so to speak, undermining those built on it, leading to the unravelling of other diplomatic achievements, as those Arab nations may actually in turn go to support Egypt and isolate Israel even further. Therefore, the prospect of a direct conflict between Israel and Egypt raises the likelihood of a wider regional war. Such a conflict could draw in other regional actors, with all the devastating consequences that could have for civilian populations there. And this is especially true for Egypt itself, with some 10 million people potentially in the firing line if Israel enact a recently leaked plan to target the Aswan High Dam, as I discussed the other week. The humanitarian toll would be immense, not least of which it would be in Gaza as well, who we must always keep in mind as a reminder that if the international community acted accordingly there earlier, we wouldn't even be talking about wider escalations and even more atrocity and genocide. And yet here we are. For more on that threat to Egypt's Aswan High Dam that has come from Israel, which would actually put the death toll we've seen in Gaza in the shade, potentially at the highest end, which has certainly only helped the prospect of war between Israel and Egypt march further towards a reality even more. Check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe before you do so though, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as help support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.